So we've created our library database and we've included things like tables to store the information. So here we've got some borrowers, and we've also created queries. So here's a query to show us which books are overdue. But this information isn't really very attractive or user-friendly. So what can we do about that? Well, if you have a look at the Create tab, we've also got sections for things called forms and for reports. And what they are for is to make the information in our Access database more attractive and user-friendly. The difference between the two is that forms are to format the information to appear on the screen, and you can include things like buttons, and reports are to format the information to appear on printouts, so we can do things like control page breaks, etc. So we're going to have a look now at how you create a report. You can use the report wizard, but I'm going to use report design because I think it's important to understand how that works, because if you use the wizard and it creates something that you don't like, you're going to have to tweak it, and that can be often more work than starting from scratch. So I'm going to go to report design. So what you see is this here. The white area, it represents the page as it's going to be printed, and we've got different sections. You've got a page header, which contains the information that's going to be at the top of each page, and you can include I don't know, things like date, page number, etc. on there. And then you've got the details section, and the details section is where the rows from the query or the records from the table appear. And then we've also got, if we scroll down, a page footer. If we click the right mouse button, we've also got a report header and footer. And the difference between a report header and a page header is that the report header only appears once per report. So that'll be at the top of the first page. There's also a report footer that appears at the end, so that will appear once at the end. If you don't want any of these sections, so you can, if you don't want a report footer but you do want a header, you can just apply both and then just resize them so that they disappear like so. So we can resize this white area, because what you know is it's not particularly friendly in terms of selecting page size. So when you preview the output, you can tweak things like that. On the right hand side here, we've got the property sheet. And if it doesn't appear, you can use the property sheet button at the top. The important thing to notice is that each section in the report has its own set of properties. So if you keep an eye on that right hand pane, if I click on the report header, we can see the properties for the header, and then we can see the properties for the page header, and then the detail. And then within the properties, you've got different tabs. So the format is what it looks like. The data is where the information is from and what we're doing with it. Other includes bits of other information. That's probably more useful for individual fields. And then we've got events. So you can control what happens when particular things are happening within the report. So you can, for example, get things to happen, macros to run when you first open the sheet or when you click on it, but we're not going to do that in this particular video. So the first thing we need to do is link the report to a particular report query or table, and that's called binding. So if you see the term unbound in a report or a form or a field on a form, then what that means is it's not linked to the database. So we can bind it. If we click on the blue section, which is the properties for the whole of the report, and go to data, the top combo box there allows us to link the whole of the report to a whole table, query, etc. Now you can only link to one thing at a time. However, you can have a thing called a subform or a sub-report, which you put inside another report, and we'll have a look at those in another video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a report that shows us which books are overdue. So that's going to use the query overdue query, and that's probably all I need to do on that particular tab. So we've created an outline report, and we can start doing things like putting headings on now. So these buttons up here allow us to add various objects to the report. Two you're going to use most frequently are the text box, that's where you put the data on, and a label, and that's for things like headings. So when you put a data field on there, it will put a label on with it, and I'll show you that in a second. So the first thing you might want to do is put the heading on. So let's click on a label and click here. So it's created effectively a mini text box. So I can do type in overdue books, for example. And I can go to the Home tab if I select that, and I can choose different fonts. So if I want that to be Arial and bold, and I can make it a different color if I want to, so, and I can make it bigger. So all the standard things. Notice that it's not particularly friendly. It's not Word. So if you make the font bigger, then it'll be too big for the box, and you just need to enlarge the box. Okay. One thing to pay attention to is the size of these different sections. It does print the whole of the section, so you might need to reduce it. I'll just leave it as it is for the moment. So I've got a header for my whole report. I might want to include some extra information, so we'll come back to that in a second. Now, if you want to add information from the query or the table, probably the easiest way to do it is to use this button here that says Add Existing Fields. You can just put a text box on. So if I draw a text box in the details section, it does put the label on it, and it says it's unbound. It means it's not linked to any of the database fields. We can link it by selecting it, going over to the Data tab, and then choosing the field name. Because we've bound the whole report to the query, then it's showing us a list of all the fields within that query to show in that particular field. But probably the easiest thing to do, if I just undo that, get rid of that, is to use this button here, Add Existing Fields. And what we can do then is just drag the existing fields onto the report. So probably what I want to see is who's got the books and which books they are. So you need to have a think about what you're actually going to do with the report. So if I'm going to use this report to contact the people who've got the overdue books and either ask them to bring the book back or just to remind them that it is overdue, I probably want the details of the person first. So I'm going to go for forename and surname, and I can just drag those onto the details section. Notice that it puts the a label on. So the bit on the right is the actual data, and the bit on the left is a label describing what the data is, so that when we run the report we can see. And in fact, if I just go use the top left button to view that, we can see that it says forename John, surname Smith. It just uses for the label the name of the field. So you might want to just change that. If you want to use capital letters, for example, you can just click in that box and it behaves like a text box. So we can format that. You can also use any of the standard formatting options. You can make them bold, for example. If you move one of them, so if I move surname, for example, it doesn't look like the label is moving, but when I let go of the button, they both move together. If I want to move them individually, I can use these big boxes on the corner. So if I wanted to make a sort of table and have the labels above the field names, I can do that. Unfortunately, you can't drag these into a separate section, so I can't drag them into the header, but you can cut them. So if I cut that and paste it up here, so I'm just using the menu for the first one so you can see where it is. So I could have it just in the page header, so it only appears once at the top of the page. I'm going to make that maybe bold and italic just to pretty it up a bit. So I can do the same thing here. I'm going to use the keyboard, so I'm going to use Control-C, Control-V, and I'm going to pop it over there. Now if I want to make them look consistent, I could try and remember what properties I've selected, but I can use the format painter. So there's a format painter in Access which behaves in the same way as the one in Word. So I click the one that I want to copy the appearance of, click the paintbrush, and then click the other one, so I can make them all look the same quite easily. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to arrange, so I'm going to make a sort of table by arranging the fields underneath their headings. So I'm going to move surname underneath the surname heading, and you can use the grid to help you. There are various menu options as well to help you line the things up, so you can right click and align, for example, so you can align the left hand sides if you want to make sure they're perfectly aligned, and then if you want to get all your headings in a row, you could select multiple ones and then right click and align the tops, for example. So I'll just do those two to begin with. So what we've got is forename and surname, and in fact now I'll stick the other bits on there. So we'll stick the book and the author on there as well. So I'm just going to cut that, pop that in there. Notice again it's not very friendly, it just sticks it on the left, but I can line it up with that line there. So title, and again I'll have a capital T for title. other thing to watch out for is the length isn't necessarily right, but you can adjust the size of the box by dragging. So title of a book could well be longer than that, and obviously if you change the size of the font, then you might need to adjust the size of the box. So I'll also pop that up there, and then we've got a little table that we can use in our report to see which books are overdue, and I'm going to line that up with there. Okay, so now if I use the top left button, we can see what that would look like. And notice that this should be showing, if we have a look at the query, it should be showing us 4 books that are overdue. We can only see 1 there at the moment, but we have got a scroll bar. So if we scroll down, we can see that actually it is showing us 4 books, but they're very spaced out. So if we go back to the top left button and go back to the design view, the reason they're so spaced out is that Access, when you come to print the report, it does show all of the whole section. So the other thing, if we have a look there, is there's quite a big gap between the report heading and the page heading, and then quite a big gap between the page heading and the first item of data, and that's because these sections are unnecessarily large. So I could just close these up a little bit. The other thing we can do is we can add other stuff in there. So if I wanted a line, for example, at the top of the page, I can add one of those. Now a line's quite useful actually, even if you put it there temporarily, to see how wide the page is, because if I look at this now, I can see that my report isn't as wide as the page. So it takes a bit of getting used to the formatting in Access. It's not quite as friendly as some other applications. It's certainly not as easy as mail merging, but you can tweak. You just need to be a little bit careful that you don't make the sections bigger than the page. So I can make the page or the report wider just by dragging that line across, and then I can make my line longer, and we can see then where the edge of the page would be. So we've got plenty of room yet, so that's fine. And to make those make the books a little bit closer, we can reduce the size of the detail section. So because the detail section gets repeated once for each record or each row in the query, you quite often want to make that as small as possible, so that when you look at the data, it appears a bit more close together, like so. So what I've forgotten to do there is format my title and author headings, so I can again just use the format painter. That's okay. Another thing that you can do, actually, you can add a field, but rather than get the information from the database, you can use a function in Access, a bit like you can in Excel, to add the information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a text box to the bottom, to my footer, and I'm going to just include the date printed. So the label is going to be printed, and at the moment that's unbound. So if I go to the property sheet and go to the data, the control source for that field, I can choose information from the query, or I can type in a function. So if you remember when we looked at the queries, there's a function called date, and what that does is that gives us today's date. So I can use that here as well, and I'm just going to pop that on the left. Probably better to move this part so we can see it better. There we go. And I might just make that italic, for example, so it stands out from the rest of the report, and I can close that up like so. Other things we can do, probably doesn't make sense with printed documents because you waste a lot of ink and it's probably less readable, but if you right click, you can change the background color and things like that. Okay, so let's have a look what that's going to look like. Okay, so we've created a report, and I would say my footer's a little bit close there. Probably might want to move that to the end and maybe put another line at the bottom, so just to make it look a bit better. So I'm going to move that over there, and I'm going to put another line here, and that will separate out the data from the header and the footer. So if I view that now, there we go, that looks a little bit better. What we notice here though is actually Margaret Bishop has got 2 books out. So if we were going to use this, for example, to phone these people up, so what I might do is just go back to the design view, and I might just add well, I haven't got the telephone number on there actually, but if we just close that for a second, and let's give that a name. So the Lozinski-Reddick naming convention for reports is RPT. So let's call that RPT overdue. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the design, and I'm just going to add the telephone number for the borrower. So now that should appear. There we go. So if we wanted to phone these people up, we could add that information to the report. So if we go back to our report, so click the right mouse button, design view, existing fields. Now sometimes when you go to existing fields it shows everything from the entire database, but what we can do is just click this link at the bottom saying only show fields in the current record source, and we've now got telephone, so let's drag that in and let's just move that up there. And capital T for telephone, and then copy that style. So now, what I might do is let's just move that a little bit closer together. There we go. So now, if we look at that, we've got the telephone number information in there. If I format this report as it appears there, there's a danger that Margaret Bishop might get 2 phone calls, particularly if I get distracted and do a couple every hour, and then when a customer comes in, I have to stop and serve them. So what we can also do in a report is add a thing called grouping. And what grouping does is it's a bit like the group function in report, if you remember that. And it will create an extra heading, and it's probably easiest if I just show you. So if you go to the design view, if you click the right mouse button and go to sorting and grouping, we can say what we want to do is group by membership number. So you need something unique. So group by membership number, what that does is it adds this extra header, if you like. So you've got the report header for the whole report, you've got the page header for every page, and now for each group then we've got a group header. So it's a way of dividing the list of all the query reports or all the records in the table into kind of sections. So you can have things like totals, etc. within a section, but it's most useful for this kind of thing. So what we can do is we can move the information about the individual into that section. So if we remove, so then the names won't repeat, and then we can obviously have the telephone up here as well. Now the layout of my labels isn't particularly helpful here, so actually what I might do is just put those in back again from scratch. So forename, so if I get rid of these from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the forename to the group header. I'm going to add the surname to the group header. And I'll add the phone number as well. So I'll add that over here. Capital T for telephone. Now this will only appear once now per person or per group. Because it's grouped on membership number, it'll only appear for once per person. And I can shrink that down. I don't need the page header anymore actually. And then what I can do is I could put the headings, and I can just use labels for those in here. So I'm going to have, let's indent these a bit. So we'll have title, and let's just make that bold. And I have another label for author. And let's also have that in bold. So just line it up a little bit. And we could add extra information about the book. So we could add, for example, when it was due. And let's put that up there. So if you're a bit of a perfectionist like me, you might want to spend time getting these things to align. So you can click that one, and that one. Control click will allow you to select multiple items. We can say align. If it's not liking that, is it? So why is it not liking that? So align. There we go. We can align the tops. And then sometimes you can see it's easier. Okay, I'm going to resize that. So now what we'll see is the information about the person will only appear once. So let's make that bold and italic. There we go. So we've got a group header containing the person about the information and some headings, and then we've got the information in the details section, and that information can be repeated, so there might be several books for each person. So this is getting a little bit more complex now, but if we have a look at this report, what we'll see is at the top we've got John Smith, and he's got one book that's overdue, which is SQL in 10 minutes. Then we've got Joe Bloggs, and he's got one book that's overdue, but Margaret Bishop has got 2 books that are overdue. So that's quite useful. I've indented them slightly so you can see which bits of the books and which bits of the people. That doesn't make it look especially tidy. What we can also do is you could add extra lines there. So there is a thing called a group footer which we can use. So if we go to design view, there doesn't appear to be a group footer there. So it's, at the moment we've got without a footer selection, so let's go for with a footer, and then all we need to do is I'll just draw a line in there to separate the people. And if we have a look at that now, that's a bit more readable. So we've got our report header, we've got a group header with the person's name and telephone number in, and then in the details section we've got all the list of books that are overdue for that person. Now, because we finish each section with a line, actually we don't need the line in the page footer anymore, do we? So we can get rid of that. And if we go back, there we go, we've got the right number of lines at the bottom. Still got quite a gap at the top, so where's that coming from? It's because we've got the page header. So the page header doesn't contain any text anymore, but it has got the line in there, so we can move that line. So it's a little bit fiddly to select, but there we go, we can select that line, just move it up a bit, make the page heading smaller, and that will remove that gap there. So that's a brief introduction to reports. You can put text on there, you can put information from fields, and you can also put information generated by functions such as my date there. You can format things, you can use the format painter, you can use lines, and you can group so that any repeated information such as names you can only show once, or you only have to show once in the group heading.